So I want to talk just for a moment about the beginning of Baptists as a whole. It's hard to trace our beginnings back to a single moment or to a single location, and I think that's especially true of Baptists. There are, last count that I saw, at least 275 different kinds of Baptists. So think about that for a moment. If someone asks you a question and you say, yeah, I'm a Baptist, they may say, what kind of Baptist are you? And you could trace your roots back to a lot of different directions and origins and people groups. There are a lot of differences between those different kinds of Baptists. Being in Topeka, Kansas, it's not unusual from time to time for someone to call up and say, are you related to Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas? And if you ever have watched the news, and by the way, if you didn't get one of these, I know there's a few folks just come in. There you go. Over here as well. Yeah, I get the question about, are you the same kind of Baptist as the Westboro Baptist folks? And I can confidently say no. In fact, we have had some of our American Baptist churches that have been protested by the folks at Westboro Baptist. One of the church mergers that we did one time was bringing together two churches, and on this particular Sunday, the first Sunday when they were launching, the Westboro Baptist folks were protesting the merger of these two churches coming together. So there is a great deal of diversity in American Baptist life. We have multicultural congregations. We have American Baptists that are in a broad theological spectrum. We just have a lot of different diversity depending on where we are. Even within the central region, there is a fair amount of that diversity. One of the stories I like to tell is about, and it relates to that diversity. There were two men that were on a cruise ship, and the cruise ship sank in the middle of the ocean. This is not an actual, this is a made-up story, but they were on this cruise ship, the cruise ship sank, and so they were able to swim to a deserted island, and they got to that island. They didn't know one another before. They were the only two survivors. And so they started to get to know one another a little bit, started telling about their lives and where they were from. And it eventually came out, hey, we're both Baptist. And so they started talking about their faith and said, this is so awesome. We don't know how long we're going to be here on this deserted island. So now you can go and start First Baptist Church, and I can go over here and I can start Second Baptist Church. And so we'll be just like we are as Baptists. And so that it was supposed to be funnier than that, but I don't always tell it that well. But that diversity and that messiness of being Baptist, I think, is not all that unusual. If you've been around Baptists for very long, you know that there is often a splintering or a splitting that happens among different Baptist groups. And that split can happen for a variety of different reasons. I've seen churches that have split because of the color of carpet. I've seen churches that have split because of theological diversity. I've seen churches that have split because they changed the worship order in the bulletin. So those kinds of things, and people are passionate. They like what they like. It's not wrong to like what you like, but sometimes I question the reasons, the motivations behind those decisions that are made. If you look at Baptists in general, I think that mostly we can trace our roots back to 17th century England. There was a group there and also in Holland that began living out their faith in a way that I think shows a heritage that we connect to even today. There are, and on your page 2 it says key distinctives. There are 8 of them that I want to highlight for you this morning that I think are true in some measure to who we are as American Baptists. The first one is the Lordship of Jesus. We are Jesus followers. being a follower of Jesus is not secondary to anything. We follow a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. So I am first and foremost a follower of Jesus, and anything else that comes after that, including American Baptist, is well down the list. I'm not an American Baptist first. And sometimes that catches people a little bit off guard because I am one of those denominational people. You know, I represent American Baptists to local congregations, but I am first and foremost a follower of Jesus. Secondly, we are people of the book. We are people of the Bible. We hold a high standard for scriptural authority in our lives. And so along with being a follower of Jesus, the Bible teaches us about who Jesus is in our world years ago, but also today. So secondly, we are people of the book. The centrality of the Bible is important to us. Thirdly, salvation by grace through faith. We believe that God has given to us a gift, and that gift is a relationship with God that leads to salvation. But that grace does not come to us through what we do in the church, by serving on committees, by working for it. It is an expression of our faith. And so it's a gift that comes to us by faith. Fourthly, believers' baptism. Here's something that is interesting. Sometimes I think people believe that Baptists are champions of immersion as far as baptism. Then we are, but those earliest Baptists were not so much concerned about baptism by immersion, the person completely going under the water. It's more about believers' baptism, that someone says, yes, I am a follower of Jesus and I want to tell to the world what that inner transformation was and is, and as an expression of that, I'm going to be baptized. There have been Baptists that have poured water over the person who's making a profession of faith. Normally, our preferred mode is to make sure it sticks, and so we'll put a person completely under the water. But there are some situations that I have baptized people in different ways. The key thing for me is that believer's baptism, that someone is saying, yes, I am a follower of Jesus. Number 5, priesthood of all believers. This is vitally important. We recognize, or we believe, that each one of us has both a privilege and a responsibility to be priestly toward one another. So you as a church decide together what you are going to do. You may grant the pastor of the church a certain amount of authority, but together you have responsibility to be priestly toward one another, to make sure that we are growing in our faith together, that we are being intentional about that faith. And so that's the priestly aspect of it. It doesn't mean that we all carry a responsibility of naming ourselves as pastors, but that priesthood of all believers is something that is really important to us. By the way, if I say anything in all of this that you have a question about or doesn't make sense or I'm not being very clear, please say something and I will try to take another run at whatever it is that I'm saying. Number 6, religious liberty, the separation of church and state. We believe as Baptists that the state should not in any way, shape, or form tell us what we do as an expression of our faith. And so that has been important to us as Baptists. Number 7, congregational autonomy. I've already spoken a little bit about this. This is something important to us. This says that we in the office in Topeka don't send you a letter or an email and say, okay, here's what you folks at Appanoose Baptist are going to focus on for this next year. If anything is going to grab a local church's attention, if I say something like that to that local church, that will never happen. And again, you will never have any more autonomy as a local church than you have right now as an American Baptist congregation. Now, I don't think that that is true for all Baptists. There are some Baptist denominations which are much more of a denomination. It's much more top-down than who we are as American Baptists. And then, number 8, cooperative missions. This is part of, we feel we can do things together much more effectively than we could do just by ourselves. What are some of those cooperative missions? Well, my guess is you folks support some local or some international missionaries. Is that right? That you do there are particular people that you've identified that you support. I'm not sure who they are, I haven't looked at it, but my guess is you might have, and they don't have to be connected to American Baptist life. They are for a lot of American Baptist congregations, but not always. You also decide where your mission dollars are going to go. We do 4 main offerings, and I'll say just a little bit more about those, but those, the World Mission Offering is in October. The 1 Great Hour of Sharing offering, which is often disaster relief, happens for most congregations around June. The America for Christ offering, I think that's the one that's coming up here soon. That is one that focuses on missions and ministries in North America. And the last one is the MMBB, or the Retired Missionaries and Ministers offering, which is often taken in December. So those are the 4 main ones that we promote. And then local churches often do other kinds of mission support that is important to them. Okay, a little bit further back in our history. Oh, well, let me say that most Baptists are also recognizers of 2 ordinances, and that is the Lord's Supper. Congregations will celebrate the Lord's Supper. Some do it quarterly, some do it monthly. I think we even have a few congregations that do it weekly. So that is up to you folks to decide how often you celebrate the Lord's Supper. And then the other is baptism, which I talked about, believers' baptism a little bit earlier. So how did we as an association get to be where we are today? Well, you go back to England, a long time ago, but here in North America, just prior to the Civil War, when the United States started talking about the issue of slavery, we were in partnership with, in association with, what is now known as the Southern Baptist Convention. And those in the northern states, primarily over the issue of slavery, said this is not right. And so there was a separation that happened around the year 1845, where the Southern Baptists remained as the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Northern Baptists became what was known as the Northern Baptist Convention. So we have a kinship, we have a history with the Southern Baptist Convention. Personally, I think that Southern Baptists are probably much more top-down in their organizational structure than we as American Baptists are, because they have what is called the Baptist Faith and Message Statement, which says, here is what you are going to believe. So I think they get a little squishy about being the priesthood of all believers and the congregational autonomy, because they say, here is what you are going to believe as a Southern Baptist congregation. Some Southern Baptists may disagree with that, and that's where we probably have one of those good old Baptist fights between my own opinion about that and their perception of that. But that's when the Northern Baptist and the Southern Baptist kind of made that split. Around the year, I've seen a couple of different dates. One is 1958 and the other is 1972, where the Northern Baptist Convention became, and this was mostly just a name change, American Baptist. So that's when here in the United States that we became the American Baptist Church. Today, there are around 5,000 congregations of American Baptist churches and 1.3 million members. We are considered one of the mainline denominations. And so that doesn't mean a whole lot for the local church or for practical purposes, but it's considered that we are one of the mainline denominations. On page 3, if you look at that page, it will give to you on page 3 a map. And when you notice the different colors there, basically what that's identifying are the different regions within American Baptist Life. There are 33 different regions that make up the American Baptist Association or denomination. And we are number one. I know the number one didn't print off very clearly there, but when they were coming up with this map and they needed to start somewhere, we were number one on the map. Now, we are one of the larger regions in terms of churches, but also in missions giving. And so that's one thing that I often encourage local churches to remember, that American Baptists in the Central Region have been very faithful in giving, and most American Baptist churches give through something called United Mission Basic. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks when I'm here. But basically, this is a way that local churches can give mission dollars that is already decided and spread out as to how it's going to be divided. So for every dollar, about half of that dollar in the United Mission program stays right here in the Central Region. It goes back into local churches. It goes to pay salaries for those who work for the region. It goes to fund camping. It goes toward the annual gathering and other events that we put on. So basically 50 cents of every dollar. It's slightly under that, but just for figuring's sake, that's roughly where it is. And I'll say more about that when I come back. But if you look at this map, you can see the 33 different regions that are listed there. And there are 33 different people like me, in American Baptist Life that work with local churches. Okay, we as American Baptists love abbreviations, and there could be just a whole book of those abbreviations. I've already mentioned a couple of them. ABHMS, American Baptist Home Mission Society. There's OGS, which is the Office of the General Secretary. There's MMBB, which is the Missionaries and Ministers Benefit Board. There is IM, which is International Ministries. And those four, OGS, ABHMS, MMBB, and IM, are the four national partners with both regions and the local churches. So if you support foreign missionaries, they're probably connected to IM, or International Ministries. If you give to the America for Christ offering, that money routes itself through ABHMS, or American Baptist Home Mission Society. If you give to the Retired Ministers and Missionaries offering in December, that goes through MMBB. And then if you are the One Great Hour of Sharing offering, that is one of those four main offerings that goes through the Office of the General Secretary. So each of those four main national partners has their own board of directors, and they are associated with each other, but they are also completely independent. So keep that in mind as well. As I mentioned, we are local church centered, and so the real voice of authority within our association comes from a local congregation. So if at any point you folks feel like you're not being heard, you need to let me know, because we want to hear from you, because I work for you. I really, in a very real way, work for you in the job that I have of both resourcing you. One of my main jobs, and I think the most important job that I have, is to be a resource to the local church. No one tells me from any of those national partners what I'm to do. I am directed by a board of directors here within the Central Region. The board of directors in the Central Region, those folks are my boss. And that board of directors is made up of representation from our local churches. And so that's kind of a little bit of how that has worked. There have been some prominent American Baptists in our nation's history. Martin Luther King Jr., a holiday that we just celebrated about the person and the work of Martin Luther King Jr. He was an American Baptist. More recently, you may have heard about some things that have been going on in Burma. There was a military coup that happened there in Burma where the military took over the government. They've been committing genocide. They've been killing their own people. And so American Baptists have banded together, and we have been lobbying senators in Washington, and the Burma Act was passed as a result of that. And that Burma Act, part of that is to really put some pressure on this military group in Burma to not kill their own people. We have a number of congregations that have Burmese origins, and so we get some firsthand information from Burma about what's happening there and about what the military is doing. Recently, we had a pastor from the Kansas Lao II Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas, and they just hired someone to be a part of their staff, but he needed to get his paperwork correct, and so we had to go back to Burma, and there were some very real risks that when he went back there that he could be conscripted into the military. And so we were part of the process of making sure that he went through the proper steps in gaining, the work visa to be here, to pastor there in Kansas City. And thankfully, he was not conscripted, but he had to do some things to kind of keep his profile very low while he was in Burma, so the Burmese military wouldn't find out that he was there and simply grab him and say, you are now going to be a part of the military. In some cases, they've even been killing pastors as a part of that military coup. So some very real examples of where being associated with a larger group of people of faith can make a real difference in the lives of other people. Would it have made as much of a difference if representatives from Appanoose Baptist wrote your local congressperson and said, hey, we want you to put pressure and pass this Burma Act? Well, you might have gotten a polite letter from your congressperson, but my guess is it wouldn't have the same impact as if 5,000 congregations were contacting their legislative representatives and saying, this is what's happening in Burma. We don't like it. This is genocide. We want you to do something about it. And the Burma Act was passed, and pressure was put on those military leaders. Any questions about the region, the regions on this map here?
So Greg, why the, like Arkansas, part of Arkansas is with the Texas one, or the, whatever it's called?
Yeah,
And part of
we have had some congregations in the northwest corner of Arkansas, and see, local churches can identify with whatever region that they want to.
Okay.
So if you folks decided, you know what, we really like Michigan, so you could choose to be part of the Michigan region if you wanted to. And so in that case, what color is Michigan? Kind of a purple? If you looked in Kansas, there would be a purple dot, there in the middle of Kansas, because it would identify Appanoose Baptist Church as part of, the Michigan region. Most of the time, that identification is done geographically, but not always. I know that Nebraska has a number of churches that are, I think they are in Texas, and they aren't necessarily identified. They're kind of recent additions, but they aren't recognized with the Nebraska color in the state of Texas.
That should be Florida.
What's that?
We're gonna be Florida.
Florida?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except Michigan.
What do you notice about the southeast part of the United States, including Texas? Why do you think that's all one color there? Any ideas?
Very few churches in that area.
Why would that be, do you think?
Southern Baptist.
Southern Baptist Convention. So this is the hotbed in the southeast part of the U.S. of the Southern Baptist Convention, and so that's predominantly the reason why there aren't many American Baptist churches there. Okay, the last page. How am I doing on time? Ooh, I got 2 minutes, or I'm 2 minutes over, aren't I?
Steve always goes.
And I can spill this over into the next time.
I go over all the time.
One of those.
What is the value of being a part of a region? Well, I think I've talked a little bit about some of those values, but also there are resources available to you folks in the form of grants and scholarships that if you, as a part of the central region, you folks have access to. I think that you folks have received some of those grants before and scholarships, if I'm not mistaken. Some of them are special ministry grants. If you have a new idea for a ministry that you want to put out there and see if it's gonna work, we have funding available for that. Scholarships, small church grants, Palmer grants. This is money that's available. So if you ever have an idea of something you wanna do here at Appanoose and you're not sure if you have the funding for it, check with me, because we might have some funding available. The cooperative effort, I've talked about a little bit before, and I'll just leave the rest of this. One last thing I would mention, that your 501c3 status as a church comes through the region and the association, or ABC USA. So basically, we provide that status so that you as a church have a 501c3, and that comes through the region. That just allows you as a church not to have to deal with all that governmental stuff. We deal with that in the office in Topeka. And I'll say more about some of the other things the region does. Sorry that I'm a few minutes over. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions, I will be around for worship this morning, and I'd be happy to try to answer any of those questions. Thanks again.